Hey, Soul Stories fam. We've got a swoon-worthy love story for you today. Let's jump in and tell us, what city are you watching from? On a late winter afternoon, the Willow Street Public Library was as quiet as a small chapel. The pale sunlight filtered through frosted glass windows, pouring over the scent of old paper, ink, and the soft rustle of turning pages. Lila Dawson stood behind the return counter, wearing thin wool gloves as she carefully wiped the moisture off each snow-dampened book spine. She was from a wealthy family. Anyone could guess by the faint pearl ring on her hand. But Lila chose a simple life: a gray turtleneck sweater, a moss-green wool skirt, low leather shoes, and her hair tied neatly with an old ribbon. "Thank you, Lila. This one's 5 days overdue," Mrs. May, an elderly reader, lowered her voice as if afraid to disturb the words sleeping on the shelves. "It's all right," Lila smiled, stamping returned on the library card. "It's Christmas. We're allowed to be late on a few things, as long as it's not kindness." Mrs. May chuckled, tugging her scarf higher. "Merry Christmas, dear. Is anyone picking you up tonight?" Lila hesitated. "I'm here until 6. Tonight I'll be redecorating the classic section." Mrs. May frowned. "You're a lovely girl. Don't give the whole night to books. Save a little for your heart." When she left, Lila stood still for a moment amid the scent of paper and dust, then exhaled softly. Her phone buzzed. On the screen, "Ethan." "Are you here yet?" she whispered, feeling an odd flutter even though their secret meetings had become routine. "I'm standing in front of the red brick building next to the green mailbox." His voice came low and warm, a little tired from the cold wind. "Your library looks like a hideout." "Come in," she said, unlocking the side door and slipping past the velvet curtain. "The staff entrance." Ethan stepped inside, shaking snow from his hair. He wore an old navy wool coat and a charcoal scarf. His face was angular, his oak brown eyes scanning the room as if memorizing every detail. He always did that, observe before speaking. Lila knew he was a mechanical engineer, working at a small fabrication shop on the edge of the city. He rarely spoke about himself, even less about his past. Only once he had said, "I'm learning to live slowly, to see what's left of me when there's nothing left to show." They loved each other through small things, sharing one cup of hot cocoa, sitting in the back seat of a city bus, or eating simple pasta while a scratched vinyl record played. Lila felt peaceful beside him, a peace the Dawson family's lavish dinners had never given her. "I need to tell you something." Lila flicked the ribbon on her wrist, fingers cold. "About Christmas." Ethan leaned his elbow on the counter, smiling. "That sounds dangerous." "My family wants me home for Christmas dinner. My mother asked 3 times," she swallowed. "I want to invite you to come with me." Ethan paused. She could hear her own heartbeat in the library's silence. Outside, the wind wrapped around the lamppost, shaking the small yellow bulbs Lila had hung the week before. She knew her family belonged to the upper class, the kind of people who use gold-edged invitations, aged Bordeaux, and stories told in numbers and achievements. She loved them, but she feared the hammering questions. What's your job? How much do you make? Is your future stable? And who is that man? "I understand," Lila said quickly, afraid he'd pull away. "If you're not comfortable, I'll tell Mom I'm on duty at the library. I don't want to put you in a difficult spot." Ethan looked at her longer than usual. In his eyes, she saw a cloud drift and fade. "Your family is your family. I can handle a few questions. It's just," she bit her lip, "they measure everything by numbers. I'm afraid they won't see you the way I do." Ethan nodded slightly, like someone used to being misjudged. "I know they're upper class, Lila. And I know that you're just an ordinary engineer," she finished for him, trying to sound playful to hide her nerves. "That I might not fit a dinner table with lace napkins and Riedel glasses," he said with a faint smirk. "But hey, I've dined with lathes and machine oil. I can learn to raise a glass." Lila laughed, her voice rippling like a creaking staircase. Then she grew serious, pulling a deep red Christmas card from the drawer. The paper was thick, with gold lettering embossed, and the edges were cut by hand. At the bottom, a small line whispered, "For family only." She set the card on the counter, looking at Ethan. Mom sent this. I'm a little afraid of that line. It feels like a border between insiders and outsiders. Ethan picked it up. His fingers paused over the 4 English words before he looked back at her. A faint smile crossed his face. Not bitter, more like someone touching an old memory. Families draw lines to protect what they think is best. Sometimes those lines hurt the ones outside, and the ones inside too. I want you on the inside, Lila said softly. Not because they want it, because I do. Her honesty made him lower the card. He took her hand across the wooden counter, warm like a promise. You invited me, so I'll go. Not to prove anything, just to be with you. By 6 o'clock, the library had emptied. Lila locked the main gate and turned off the overhead lights, leaving only the string of yellow bulbs around the desk. Together they shelved the last books, Tolstoy, Austen, Hemingway, Nguyen Nhat Hanh. Then Lila snapped a Christmas with Books photo for her volunteer group. Once, she said while sorting, I thought being rich meant standing in the center of a party, cameras flashing, servers remembering your name. Now I think being rich is having someone next to you at the grocery store at 10 p.m., seriously debating which laundry scent to buy. What scent would you pick? Cedarwood, she replied quickly, blushing, because it smells like your scarf. Ethan smiled. And I think being rich means being able to live without showing off. He paused as if he'd accidentally touched an old door. Sometimes you only know who truly loves you when you have nothing left to show. Lila looked straight at him. I love you when you pick children's books for me because you know I'm afraid of the dark. I love you when you reverse the car 3 times just to park neatly because you respect the next driver. I love you when you don't talk about yourself but ask about Mrs. May, the night guard, the people no one asks about. Outside, snow began to fall thickly. The city turned milky white. The street lamp in front of the library wore a cap of snow. Standing by the side door, they watched the few passing cars, their breaths turning to mist. She handed him a spare wool hat. Wear it or you'll get sick. I'll try to stay healthy enough to hold that Riedel glass, he joked, then softened his tone. But Lila, if any question makes you uncomfortable that night, just hold my hand. We'll answer together. She nodded, eyes glistening like melting snow. I'll hold it tight. They planned to meet the next day at 5 p.m. in front of the library, then head to the Dawson home together. Lila walked him to the steps, watching as he opened the door, and the cold wind rushed in, bringing the scent of pine and baked cinnamon. I'll come, Ethan said, and I'll be polite. I won't even mention the lathe. Don't mention the lathe, Lila laughed. Talk about books. My mother worships people who read Proust. I can read Proust's table of contents, he winked. She led him to the reader's message wall, a large blackboard covered in white chalk. Which book held you through a winter? Lila carefully wrote, Little Women, L. Then she handed him the chalk. He thought for a moment and wrote, The Old Man and the Sea, E. He added one perfect dot. Sometimes a man only has a small boat, a fishing line, and patience. And the fish is too big, Lila added. Yeah, Ethan said quietly, but if you don't fish, you'll never know how strong you are. He turned back to the counter and picked up the Christmas card. The yellow light gleamed along its gilded edge, making the words for family only glow like a challenge. Ethan rolled the card between his fingers, as if weighing an entire dinner, a mansion, and the Dawson family's polished manners. I'll go, he said finally, eyes still on the card. Tomorrow I'll go with you. Lila released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She wanted to hug him but only dared to squeeze his hand once more, leaving in it the warmth of a silent map home. The Dawson mansion stood at the end of a cobblestone road, a straight line of cypress trees dusted with snow as fine as powdered sugar on a cake. The wrought iron gate swung open, and a row of garden lights flickered on all at once, leading to the grand foyer where a crystal chandelier cascaded down like a waterfall of light, pouring gold onto the oak floor, polished so well that one could see the grain like fingerprints. Ethan stepped out of the taxi, his old wool coat speckled with snow. He straightened his back and drew a deep breath, like a diver before plunging into cold water. The heavy wooden door opened, and Lila appeared in a dark green knit dress, her hair loosely pinned up, cheeks flushed from the cold. She ran down the steps and gripped his hand so tightly that the warmth from her knitted gloves reached his skin. "Don't worry. I'm right here with you," she whispered. "If they ask anything difficult, just look at me." "I will," Ethan replied softly, "because everything here is already too bright." Lila smiled faintly and let him inside. Oil portraits of Dawson ancestors lined the walls, silverware gleamed in glass cabinets, and the fireplace crackled, as if keeping time for the house. The air smelled of cinnamon, butter, and oak, a scent both luxurious and foreign. Lila's mother, Margaret, came out of the living room wearing a plum-colored satin dress and a pearl necklace that glowed like ivory. Her face was magazine perfect, the exact smile, the precise warmth in her eyes. "You must be Ethan." She extended her hand, soft, cool. "Welcome to the Dawson home." "Yes, ma'am." Ethan shook her hand just enough, nodding instead of offering unnecessary pleasantries. Lila's father, Charles, emerged behind her, fastening the button on his vest. "You're an engineer." He looked at Ethan's worn coat the way a hunter studies a footprint. "Mechanical?" "Yes, mechanical," Ethan said, his voice calm as the surface of a lake when the wind passes. "Interesting," Charles replied, though his tone sounded more like he was noting an unnecessary expense. "Come in. Dinner's almost ready." They walked through a hallway lined with silver mirrors. In the reflection, Ethan saw himself and Lila, a man in an old coat and a woman holding his hand as tightly as if mooring a boat to the dock. That feeling made him stand a little taller. Derek, Lila's brother, was pouring wine in the sitting room. Charcoal gray suit, slicked back hair, a smile shaped like the check mark of a closed deal. He set down the burgundy bottle, his eyes sliding over Ethan's coat and stopping at the frayed cuff. "You've met someone modest, Lila," Derek said with a joking tone that landed like a nail. Lila squeezed Ethan's hand, her eyes flashing a warning. Ethan's smile barely moved as he accepted the glass Derek handed him. "Money doesn't make people modest," he said evenly, his tone sharp as a freshly honed blade. "It only makes them louder." Derek chuckled, shrugging. "An interesting philosophy. From the workshop floor." "Philosophy often comes from noisy places," Ethan replied, raising his glass. Dinner was served in a long dining room with white linen, silverware gleaming like dividing lines, and green velvet chairs. Margaret asked polite, rehearsed questions. "Which neighborhood do you live in? Your job is stable, I hope? The income enough for a family life?" The words stable and enough rang out like notes practiced for years, never offbeat by a fraction. "Yes, enough," Ethan said in that same calm tone. "Enough not to lack what truly matters." Charles cleared his throat. "What matters is responsibility. At your age, one must think ahead." "Yes," Ethan replied, setting down his fork. "I think ahead, in depth." Derek gave a quiet laugh, leaning an elbow on the table. "At my firm, we're raising capital for a new division. A major fund is reviewing us. They don't like dreamers. They like numbers." "Numbers," Ethan repeated, tasting the word like a different kind of wine. "Good. Numbers are always honest, when people don't try to teach them to lie." Under the table, Lila tapped the tip of her shoe against his, a coded rhythm. "Don't let them pull you into their game." He tilted his head slightly, letting her know he understood. She took a breath and smiled, changing the subject to the pumpkin soup, the garden behind the house, the novel Mrs. May had just borrowed. The maid refilled their glasses, and the chandelier's light trembled as if the room itself exhaled. Still, some chills don't fade quickly. Margaret complimented Lila's pearl earrings, then glanced at the old watch on Ethan's wrist, as if it were a misplaced ornament in a perfectly curated room. "Would you like to wash your hands before the main course?" Lila asked softly, offering him a breath of escape. "The restroom's at the end of the hall, to the left." "I'll be right back," Ethan said, folding his napkin neatly. He stood. The red wine in his glass caught his reflection once more, the color of things people only think they understand. He nodded politely to the table, then stepped out of the dining room, walking down the carpeted hall past the painting of the Dawson ancestors riding across a golden field. Ethan had just turned into the hallway when like a loose thread slipping from the edge of fabric. The voices of the adults spilled out through a half-open door. That guy's got nothing. Look at his watch. It's probably from a street stall. A snort of agreement followed. Lila deserves someone with a better future. Ethan stood still. No surge of anger, no sharp reply, only a single heartbeat slowing down before everything settled back into place. He looked at himself in the mirror. A man in an old wool coat, a wrist showing a vintage ivory-faced Patek Philippe, its leather strap darkened by years of wear. Worth $400,000, his father's last gift. And his father had said, "Never let anything speak for you. Let the way you live speak first." Ethan opened the door and stepped into the dining room, where the chandelier still cast light over the perfectly ironed white tablecloth. Lila looked up first. In her eyes was a question written in the thinnest of lines. "Are you okay?" But Ethan only gave a small nod before pulling out the chair beside her. The maid brought in the main course, grilled beef in green pepper sauce with buttered potatoes. The aroma reached Ethan like a bridge to the factory dinners of his past. Torn bread, thin soup, and the joyful laughter of workers watching grease pop and hiss. He bowed slightly in thanks, handling the knife with the precision of a man who once measured in micrometers. Neat, quiet, exact. "Ethan," Mrs. Margaret's voice flowed smoothly, "do you find the food to your taste?" "Delicious, ma'am," he replied. "Thank you." Derek leaned back, raising his glass. "Seems your watch," he glanced, "doesn't quite match a fine dining evening." Ethan set down his knife and fork, not glancing at the watch, only at the wine before him. The red liquid reflected in his brown eyes, giving them a warm, steady glow. Calm, unashamed. He took a sip and answered, as if speaking to the wine itself. "Some things don't need to match the setting, only the person." "Sounds poetic," Charles smirked, "but life's a quarterly report, not a poem." "Yes," Ethan nodded. "That's true. It's just that some numbers shouldn't be bent." The air froze for half a second. Under the table, Lila placed her hand lightly on Ethan's knee. A soft, deliberate break. He understood. He didn't need to prove anything. Not tonight. They continued eating. The clink of silverware against porcelain, the crackle of the fireplace, the whisper of wind tapping at the window. 3 different rhythms layering into a quiet symphony few would notice. Ethan observed each face. Margaret's perfect smile, Charles's calculating eyes, Derek's confidence shining like a rising stalk, and Lila's gaze, gentle, wanting to protect everyone while keeping a piece of kindness for herself. "What shifts do you work?" Derek asked, casually casting bait. "I don't work by shifts," Ethan answered. "By tasks." "Sounds unstructured." "Sounds flexible," Lila corrected softly. Ethan turned to her and smiled. "Thank you," he said with his eyes. Mrs. Margaret moved the topic to the upcoming charity gala, discussing the guest list, donation goals, and event sponsors. Ethan listened without judgment. He had once stood in halls plated with more gold than this one, had seen money flow like fire across the sea. He knew what power smelled like. The oak wood, the new leather, the heavy perfume worn like armor. But tonight, he chose silence. The air in the dining room was like a thin sheet of ice over a winter lake, beautiful, polished, but ready to crack at the slightest tap. The candles burned quietly. The chandelier's glow spread over porcelain plates rimmed in gold, and every fork and spoon sat at precisely 22 degrees, as was Margaret Dawson's custom. The maid refilled the wine. The sound of the deep red liquid running down the glass was like a long, whispered sigh. "Ethan," Margaret began, her smile polite yet distant, "does your job pay enough to take care of my daughter?" Lila flinched slightly. She shifted in her chair, about to smooth things over, but Ethan had already set his fork down. Metal touched porcelain, ting, a small, cold sound, like a pin striking glass. "I believe love is also a form of long-term investment," Ethan said evenly, his tone warm. "The return isn't measured in numbers, but in how 2 people grow, and the biggest risk isn't a lack of money, but a lack of respect." A brief silence, then a dry, cutting laugh. "Poetic," Derek smirked at his mother. Or maybe just broke. Charles tapped his finger on the polished wooden table. A long-term investment means knowing how to manage risk. Do you have a plan that's more specific than a proverb? Ethan lifted his glass, swirling it slowly so the wine left thin trails down the sides. My plan is to work hard and spend wisely. Never borrow what I don't understand. Never promise what I can't keep. He set the glass down, his eyes calm and steady. And if I'm lucky, build a home not propped up by words. Margaret smiled faintly. You sound idealistic. Idealism, Ethan replied, is what people use to measure reality, not to cover it. Lila jumped in quickly. Mom, the library's hosting a children's reading next week. We're talking about adult matters, Lila. Derek interrupted, his dimple flashing like punctuation. Don't trivialize it. He turned back to Ethan. Where do you live? Near the workshop. Rent? Just enough. Car? I walk when I can. Savings? Enough for what matters, Derek smirked. Your answers seem short on numbers. Numbers, Ethan nodded. Come after method. Margaret raised her glass, crystal catching the light. A man's role in a family is to provide security. And a woman's role? Ethan asked gently. She blinked, momentarily thrown off. To be secure. Lila's hand gripped the edge of the table. Mom, I can take care of myself. I work at the library. I know how to budget. Charles shrugged. The library's fine, sweetheart. But a family needs a solid provider, not just stories. Ethan tilted his head. Stories have saved more lives than numbers. Saved with what? Derek scoffed. Feelings. With principles, Ethan said. Principles are the backbone of a story and of finance. At that, the air seemed to tighten like a pulled string. Silverware clinked again. Ting, ting, each sound colder than before. The maid served endive salad drizzled with passion fruit dressing. The gentle tang did nothing to soften the mood. Margaret cleared her throat. Do you have a 5-year plan? Yes, ma'am, Ethan replied. Year 1, learn to stay silent when misunderstood. Year 2, do what's right even when mocked. Year 3, build what few can see but many will need. Year 4, protect the one I love from the storm. Year 5, remember year 1. For a moment, Lila looked at him like a book opened to the exact page she'd been searching for. But Derek laughed, a dry, stale sound like day-old bread. You answer like an unemployed poet. Ethan didn't smile. He simply picked up his fork, cut a thin slice of meat, and ate slowly. His calmness made the entire table suddenly aware of the fire crackling in the hearth, as if silence itself had begun to speak. Charles leaned forward. Do you know Reed Capital? Ethan set his fork down, dabbed his mouth with his napkin. I've heard of them. They're ruthless. They peel through reports like onions. I just hope they see the value in us. People don't just see, Ethan said. They also feel. Business doesn't need feelings, Derek waved dismissively. Businesses without feeling, Ethan replied softly, often make soulless products. Margaret shifted to a conciliatory tone. Anyway, it's Christmas. Let's talk about something warmer. Yes, Ethan nodded, his eyes meeting Lila's, letting her know he wouldn't take things further. Christmas is when we choose how to speak. Lila quickly added, Mom, the Yule log dessert tonight has chestnuts, your favorite. The table eased down half a tone. More wine was poured, silverware touched plates again, ringing like glass bells that brushed against each other. The conversation drifted to the upcoming ski trip, the Nutcracker Ballet, and the gilded holiday cards already sent. Ethan listened quietly, his eyes warm, his hands placed neatly beside his plate. Every gesture of a man showing respect for a table that had yet to respect him. Then Derek leaned back, resting one arm on his chair, and tossed a sentence like a coin onto thin ice to see how far it would crack. Dad's company is waiting for Reed Capital's investment. Let's just hope they don't send over some cheap engineers like you. The final word dropped. Silence thickened. Someone's knife slipped against a plate. Ting, sharp enough to raise goosebumps. Ethan said nothing. He looked up, a faint gleam in his eyes. Not anger, but recognition. The quiet awareness of someone who had just marked a turning point. He lifted his glass, letting the red reflect in his gaze once more. Then he took a small sip and set it down gently. Beside him, Lila clutched the edge of the tablecloth, her heart pounding, ready to step in. But Ethan gave a slight shake of his head, a tiny gesture meant only for her. Let me handle it. And somehow the dinner went on, as if those sharp words were merely stray notes in a symphony still building toward a climax no one yet sensed was coming. The snow was falling harder by the time dessert was served. From the ceiling-high windows, white flakes blew against the glass like thousands of undelivered letters. Ethan excused himself to get some air. No one stopped him. The fireplace kept crackling, like a mechanical heartbeat keeping time for the room. The glass door slid open. Lila stepped out, looping her wool scarf around his neck. Are you cold? No, Ethan replied, his voice still carrying a trace of wood smoke. Not enough to call for rescue. She stood beside him, her shoulder brushing his. From here, the chandelier inside looked like a glowing planet where people were arranged perfectly, like porcelain figurines on a shelf. Out here, it was different. The snow spared no one, and the silence asked no one to smile. I'm sorry, Lila whispered, as if afraid her breath might shatter the snow, for the things they said. Ethan shook his head. It's fine. I'm used to being judged by the clothes I wear. A wry smile touched his lips. Clothes are easier to replace than people. Lila lowered her gaze, clutching the edge of her scarf, then looked up at him again. The hesitation she'd had at dinner was gone. What filled her eyes now was the quiet courage Ethan had always seen in her at the library, the kind of courage that warms someone with both hands. She wrapped her arms around him, just enough for him to hear the steady beat of her heart beneath her coat. I don't need you to be rich, she said, each word falling warm against the wool at his collar. I just need your love to be real. The wind shifted. A gust of snow brushed his face and melted quickly against his heated skin. Ethan felt his heart warm in the most physical way, blood rushing faster, his hands instinctively knowing where to go. One around her back, the other at her nape, keeping the small ribbon in her hair from slipping loose. Suddenly, all the defenses inside him, the practiced silences, the reminders to never trust too soon, receded like a tide. Lila stood there in the snow and wind, saying the only thing that needed no decoration. Love is real. You know, Ethan said, gazing toward the row of pine trees capped in white, I've been in rooms bigger than that one, with more applause than in there. But warmth is out here. Lila smiled, her breath forming a thin cloud. She rose on her toes, pressing her forehead against his. You're impossible. You're used to a humble man, Ethan teased in Derek's tone, then chuckled at himself. No, Lila shook her head softly. I'm used to a good man. Inside, the faint clinking of spoons and polite laughter followed a perfect rhythm. Out here, the snow fell like a lullaby. Ethan looked at Lila, wondering when he had started to believe this simple truth. Among all those practiced manners, she was the one genuine thing. She never tried to change him. She simply stood beside him so he didn't have to change what he believed. I believe in us, he said quietly. In this love. So do I. Ethan leaned down and kissed her. A slow kiss, giving the snow time to settle on their shoulders, the golden lights time to tremble, and their hearts time to be sure that every word they just said was true. The scent of cinnamon from the dining room mingled with the pine outside, creating a fragrance like the pages of an old book opened on a winter night. When they parted, foreheads still touching, Lila whispered with a faint smile, You can go back in, finish your dessert, and this time, if they start again, let me speak. She didn't finish the sentence, only pulled his scarf snug and tied the knot firmly. Okay, Ethan said, but if things get uncomfortable, we'll come back out here. The snow's more polite. Don't worry, she winked. I'll be watching your back. Ethan went inside. The glass door slid open, and the warmth of the fireplace wrapped around them like a blanket. At the table, Mrs. Margaret was talking about the charity ball. Mr. Charles mentioned investment portfolios, and Derek was marking something on his phone. Lila placed her hand lightly on Ethan's arm. a silent signal. Ready. Just then, Ethan's phone vibrated in his coat pocket. A short, abrupt buzz, like a pebble skimming the surface of a frozen lake. He glanced at the screen for only a second. Assistant. Sir, the deal between Reed Capital and Dawson Industries is ready for the final meeting the day after tomorrow. You're watching Soul Stories, where every story whispers of love, healing, and hope. Don't forget to subscribe and be a part of our journey. The next morning, the snow had stopped, leaving small caps of white on the pine branches like sugar that hadn't quite melted. Sunlight filtered through cream-colored linen curtains and poured into the Dawsons' dining room, where an English breakfast had already been set. Soft-boiled eggs in porcelain cups, buttered toast, strawberry jam, and strips of bacon lined up as neatly as a perfect report. Ethan sat at the end of the table by the window. In front of him was a cup of black coffee, unsweetened, its surface gleaming and catching the morning light in a thin silver streak. He lifted it, inhaled the fragrant bitterness, and exhaled slowly. Lila sat beside him, her hand resting on his thigh, fingers tightening, a quiet anchor holding him steady amid the sharp corners of the room. We need capital, Charles began, his voice brisk, as if he'd repeated the line all night in his head. If Reed Capital funds us, we can save the company. He flipped open a file folder, revealing printed charts, forecasts, and cash flow diagrams. They're coming for the final evaluation tomorrow. Margaret poured more tea. The sound of liquid against porcelain was like a reassuring sound. She smiled, her pearl necklace trembling slightly. If I ever meet Mr. Reed, I'll kneel to thank him. That man's a legend, private, ruthless, uncompromising. She tilted her head toward Lila, half in jest, half testing. Just imagine, he walks in, signs the deal, and everything's grand again. Grand isn't always good, Lila said softly. Sometimes, being right matters more. Derek scrolled on his phone, the blue glow reflecting on his chin. Reed's known for digging deep. If they see potential, they sign. If not, they cut. Simple as that. He bit into a piece of toast, swallowing as if downing a market analysis. The question is, how do we make them see? Ethan lifted his cup to eye level. In the dark surface of the coffee, tiny window panes are stacked like a mirrored city. He saw himself shrink to a single black dot, then vanish as the surface rippled. A thought passed silent. Even sitting here among them, he was only a reflection on water. Ethan, Charles said, as if suddenly remembering there was another man in the room. Any thoughts? From an engineer's perspective, the word engineer dropped like a coin, light but with a distinct ring. About investment? Ethan smiled faintly, taking a sip. I think competent people want to see the truth. Not only in the numbers, but in how they're treated. They invest in integrity, not performance. What kind of integrity? Derek leaned back. Growth, market share, profit margins. That's integrity. He glanced at Lila, teasing but edged. Long-term love and other dreams. That was last night's topic. Lila squeezed Ethan's hand gently, a signal not to take the bait. Margaret switched topics, but only superficially. Ethan, do you know anyone at Reed Capital? A contact, a reference, anything? Ethan set his cup down. The morning light fractured on the rim, scattering into bright shards. I've heard of them, he said simply. Hearing isn't enough, Charles concluded. At that level, you need someone to speak for you, or your file gets buried before they even meet you. Margaret looked to Lila. You should write a letter. A beautiful one, about the family, our commitment. Maybe include a touching story. They're human too, after all. Lila sighed. I'll try, she said, then turned to Ethan, her eyes whispering, Don't worry, I'm still here. Ethan nodded slightly. In his mind, a thought formed and dissolved, leaving only a trace of warmth. Sometimes the savior we need is sitting right beside us, and we don't even know it. He didn't say it aloud. He took another sip of black coffee, the bitterness flowing over his tongue like a decision freshly signed in his heart. In this part of the house, everything reflected light, voices, ambition, and he had hidden long enough to know that truth reveals itself in its own time. Breakfast continued with words that pretended to be objective. Debt ratio, cash flow, collateral. Every so often, Lila squeezed his hand as if counting heartbeats. Ethan listened quietly, collecting glimpses of the humans beneath the jargon. The fear in Charles's eyes, the mechanical faith in Derek's tone, and Margaret's hunger to make everything grand again. He understood. He'd once been there himself. Applause can be more addictive than being right. This afternoon, Charles said, we'll revise the presentation deck. Tonight, maybe a small dinner, if Mr. Reed agrees to a private meeting. Mr. Reed's a busy man, Derek said with a dismissive flick. But who knows? Ethan set his cup down again. The coffee was nearly gone, the remaining streak of black reflecting a thinner, sharper light. He looked at each of them, then turned to Lila. She caught his gaze and suddenly understood. Something was about to change. Not in the report, but in the story itself. This afternoon, if you're free, Ethan said softly, let's stop by the library for a while. I owe you a peaceful book-picking day. Lila smiled and nodded. He pushed his chair back politely. Thank you for breakfast. I have an appointment to get to turning to Charles, he added. I hope tomorrow's evaluation is clear and fair. Charles nodded, hearing only the words he wanted to. The glass tower of Reed Capital rose like a slab of blue ice in the heart of the financial district. Its facade mirrored the silvery gray noon sky, while the marble lobby was so quiet that every heel click echoed. The Dawson family entered, Mr. Charles leading, Mrs. Margaret adjusting her pearl necklace, Derek glancing at the brass wall plaque. Reed Capital. Floor 42. Lila followed last, hands clasped inside her coat pockets, her heartbeat keeping its own rhythm. The glass elevator slid upward soundlessly. The display panel counted the floors, numbers swapping places like stock prices on a trading board. Derek checked his reflection and straightened his tie. Remember to focus on growth and cash flow, he said, glancing at Lila. Don't drift off into library talk. I won't speak unless necessary, Lila replied softly. In her mind, last night's snowy balcony blurred with the chandelier's glow. Two worlds that never touched. The 42nd floor reception opened like a magazine spread. Charcoal leather chairs, walnut tables, a panoramic view of the city through floor-to-ceiling glass. The assistant welcomed them into the main conference room. On the wall hung a wide screen showing the data room interface, and a stack of documents embossed with REED lay neatly arranged on the polished table. Mr. Reed will be right in, the assistant said pleasantly, setting down a tray of water. Please have a seat. They sat. Mr. Charles straightened the presentation folder and took a steadying breath. Mrs. Margaret checked her messages, typing quickly to a friend about the thrill of meeting a living legend. Derek flipped open his laptop, reviewing slides. 18% annual growth. Target profit margin 11 to 13%. Numbers lined up like soldiers ready for a parade. The door opened. A man walked in, wearing a dark blue suit and a muted tie. No pin, no logo, only composure. He placed his phone on the table and pulled out a chair. The light from the glass wall slid across his shoulder, casting a sharp line over the wooden surface. Apologies for the delay. I'm Ethan Reed. Silence. 1 second. 2. Derek reacted first, his face draining of color like paper fresh from a printer. He looked at Ethan, then at the name glowing on the corner screen. Ethan Reed, managing partner, as if he needed external proof for what his eyes refused to believe. Mrs. Margaret raised a trembling hand to her chest, pearls frozen midair. You mean, she swallowed. You're Ethan Reed, he repeated, his tone calm, even. We met in a different context. Today, if possible, let's speak as equals. Mr. Charles shifted, quickly wearing his negotiation face, measured, respectful, faintly eager for opportunity. Mr. Reed, he greeted, rising automatically to shake hands. And honor. Ethan's handshake was firm, nothing more. He sat at the head of the table, posture straight as steel, but never arrogant. Shall we begin? His gaze dropped to the file. I've reviewed your data room. There are a few points that need clarification. Derek snapped out of his daze, closing and reopening his laptop like an actor switching scenes mid-performance. Yes, sir. Regarding our first quarter projections? Before projections, Ethan said, placing his pen on the folder, let's talk about principles. Reed Capital doesn't invest because of speeches, but because of truth. We invest in value that lasts and in how people treat the things they think are small. A silence swept the table. Mrs. Margaret straightened, her professional smile returning. I'm sure last night was a misunderstanding, she said softly. You know, family dinners can be— I understand, Ethan interrupted gently. That's why I'm here, to separate the dinner from the due diligence. One has nothing to do with the other. Lila sat 3 seats away, trembling slightly, as if dragged from a snow-lit balcony into a golden whirlwind. He's— that man? The thought spun without landing. Part of her wanted to smile with pride. The man she loved was the one leading this room. Another part was dazed. The quiet engineer, the old wool coat, the man from the library. All of that was real. But who was Ethan Reed within that truth? Ethan turned the first page. Section 3.2, Inventory. The numbers on the report and actual stock differ by 7%. I need to know whether that's a temporary adjustment or presentation handling. Mr. Charles leaned forward. That's because we just cleared slow-moving items, not yet updated. It's entirely in good faith. Ethan nodded, marking a line. Good faith needs documentation. Send me the liquidation list from the past 3 months with contracts. He flipped to the next page. Section 4.1, Short-term debt. I want to see your deleveraging plan by quarter, not annually. Derek cleared his throat, regaining a trace of confidence. If the fund proceeds, we only proceed when the truth is clear, Ethan interjected softly but firmly. And when your value doesn't rely on cosmetic optimism. The words landed sharp and exact. Mrs. Margaret looked at her son, then at her husband. Mr. Charles rubbed the folder cover, eyes darkening, a man realizing this was not a meeting where charm would work. Ethan paused his pen, lifting his gaze. His eyes moved across each of them, finally resting on Lila. Just half a second. Half a second was enough to place something private in the middle of business without tipping the balance. Last night on the balcony, she had said, I just need your love to be real. Now in this glass room, he was keeping the truth upright. We'll resume once I receive the supplemental documents. Ethan closed the folder. Your risk review this afternoon remains as scheduled. By then, every number must align. He rose. The assistant opened the door. The Dawsons remained seated as if the chairs had grown heavier. At the threshold, Ethan paused, turned slightly, and said quietly but clearly, Last night I heard enough. Today I focus solely on numbers and principles. That's fairness for everyone. He stepped out. The door closed softly, like a grammatically perfect period. Silence deepened. Derek exhaled sharply, typing furiously on his laptop. Mrs. Margaret pressed her hand to her chest again, searching for breath. Mr. Charles grabbed his phone and dialed the chief accountant without a word. That afternoon, the 42nd floor was as quiet as a museum after closing. On the walnut conference table, the due diligence report lay open like a map with certain inked lines deliberately blurred. Ethan bent over it, flipping back to section 4.1, short-term liabilities, then to appendix 7, operating cash flow. The numbers didn't match. The 7% discrepancy from that morning finally made sense. A revolving loan had been handled by being reclassified as an internal receivable in the previous quarter, making the report look cleaner. He drew a firm line through the section and marked a small square in the margin, like hammering a nail into the floor. The conference room door opened. Charles and Margaret walked in, Derek following close behind. They no longer looked polished. The signs of strain showed in every excess motion, the tie pulled slightly off, the pearls clinking against each other. Ethan closed the file and slid it across the table. I've seen enough evidence. The revolving debt was shifted to accounts receivable, along with an unrecorded inventory adjustment. Whatever you call it, it's still risk concealment. Mr. Reed, please hear us out, Charles said quickly. We just needed to maintain cash flow through this quarter. We'll correct it next quarter. It's only temporary. Temporary or permanent, Ethan replied. It's still manipulation if the purpose is to make the picture prettier before funding. Margaret stepped forward, resting her hand on the folder as if to hold it in place. You know, our family, we've had a terrible year. If Reed could just fund a little, just one signature, we'd survive, and then we'd go back to being transparent. Ethan looked at her, not coldly but clearly. Reed Capital doesn't invest in those who don't respect real value. Real value begins with how you look at numbers. Derek interjected, we have collateral market share, target growth, and a habit of renaming debt, Ethan cut in sharply. The room fell silent. Charles lowered his eyes to the pages. His shoulders sagged. Margaret looked up, her voice pleading. You've met our family. You know Lila. Please. Ethan didn't respond. He simply stood, gathered his pen, and buttoned his jacket. When he nodded to his assistant at the door, the soft creak of the hinge sounded like a sigh. The evaluation is suspended. When the data reflects reality, we'll talk again. He turned to leave, leaving behind a thick folder and a silence wedged between the words family and principal. Outside, the city was shrouded in fine snow. Ethan stepped onto the service balcony of the 42nd floor, where the wind was fierce and the gray sky was sliced by steel beams. He gripped the frozen railing. His mind wasn't tangled, just heavy. He thought of the balcony the night before, the wool scarf around her neck, and her words, all I need is your love to be real. Truth sometimes means saying no. Ethan! Lila's voice broke through the wind. She ran toward him, clutching her coat, cheeks flushed from the cold. Her shoes crunched through the snow, stopping right in front of him. Why did you hide it from me? The question burst out before she could stop herself, her voice trembling. Why didn't you tell me you were him? Ethan looked into her eyes where snow and fire met. He took a deep breath. Because I wanted to know, if I were no one at all, would anyone still love me for real? He spoke slowly, letting each word resist the wind. I'm sorry for hiding it. I never meant to turn love into a test, but I was afraid. I was betrayed when everything was too bright. Staying anonymous was how I learned to see people and how I hid. Lila stood silent, the wind tangling her hair. Then she asked more softly, and about the report? I'm sorry for that too, Ethan said. I can't invest in your father's company. They falsified the data. He tilted his head slightly, speaking with gentleness rather than judgment. If I look the other way now, they'll pay a far higher price later, and I'd lose the only thing keeping me upright, my principles. A flake of snow melted on Lila's eyelash like a tear. She gazed past him, toward the rooftops dusted white. Tears rose but didn't fall, only glimmered at the edge of her eyes. I'm sad you hid the truth, she said quietly, but I understand my father's company better than anyone. I know the problem isn't just mismatched numbers, and I don't want you to lose your integrity just to save us. Ethan exhaled, a thin cloud of vapor. I knew you'd say that, but I didn't dare hope. You're kind in a way that makes others want to be worthy. She pressed her lips together, then stepped closer. What about us then? We don't depend on a signature, Ethan replied, but I respect you enough not to mix what's personal with what's professional. I'll always choose you, but I'll also always choose the truth. If those two ever collide, I'll stand still and let you decide. Lila looked up at him. In her eyes, last night's balcony overlapped today's, one cold, one warm. She nodded. Give me time. Not to forgive, but to get used to the fact that the man I love has two names, and both are real. Ethan nodded, not reaching out to stop her. I'm here. Whether you need silence or words, I'm here. For a long moment they stood side by side without touching. Only the snow touched them both, equally. Lila pulled her collar higher, smiling faintly, the kind of smile that belongs to someone sad enough not to lie and strong enough not to despair. I'm going back to my mother. They need someone to remind them what's right, not what's grand. All right, Ethan said. And Lila, she turned back. Thank you for choosing the truth, even when it hurts. She nodded once more, then walked away. Her figure grew smaller in the snow but never wavered. Ethan stayed where he was, watching the gray sky divide into shades. He slid his hands into his pockets and felt the cold edge of a stopped watch. His heart felt lighter, yet aching. The feeling of a man who had failed to save a company with money, but might have saved a love with principles. News that Reed Capital had paused its due diligence spread quickly, like wind hissing through a door crack. Since dawn, the Dawson house had been stripped of laughter. Phones rang endlessly, inboxes flashed with red-flagged words. Delays, adjustments, credit extensions. Mr. Charles sat before his computer, tie loosened, watching numbers slide downhill like the snow falling beyond the eaves. Mrs. Margaret paced the room, clutching a small notebook filled with names of people she'd once shaken hands with at galas, trying to recall who might still owe her a favor. By noon, the sky had turned the color of lead. Lila came in carrying a pot of hot tea. She set it down gently. "Have you eaten anything?" she asked softly. Mrs. Margaret looked up, her once kind eyes now stretched thin, glassy. "Call Ethan," she said. Then in a lower voice, still edged with command, "Ask him to help. Whether it's a bridge loan or a connection, I'm sure Ethan can make it happen." Mr. Charles didn't look up. "The company needs liquidity within 2 weeks. Otherwise, the bank will cut our line. You have to talk to him." Lila straightened her back. "I can't." She met both their eyes. "I won't put Ethan in that position, and I won't let this family keep chasing appearances. If there's something left to save, it has to start from real value." The room chilled. Mrs. Margaret's hands clenched. "You make it sound as if your father and I are frauds." "I'm saying we need to be honest," Lila replied gently. "In our products, our work, our lives." Derek came rushing down the stairs, phone in hand. "Wake up, Lila. Business isn't an ethics class. Call him now." "I'm not calling," Lila said, shaking her head. "I won't turn love into an emergency line." The air cracked like glass. Mrs. Margaret turned away, her voice dry and brittle. "Fine. When this house collapses, don't say I didn't beg for help." Mr. Charles shut his laptop with a hard snap, not meeting her eyes. Derek sneered, brushing past Lila as if walking through a shadow. Her family, the people she loved, had turned their backs on her. Lila stood still, her hand trembling in her pocket. She knew she had just chosen the lonelier road, but if she didn't take it now, she would regret it forever. That afternoon, Ethan called. His voice was warm but low, like a blanket being laid over a storm. "I can provide a short-term fund to help for 2 weeks," he said, "or I can connect another credit line. No one has to know it's from me." "No." Lila's answer came fast, then softened. "Thank you, but no." Silence for a few seconds. "Why?" Ethan asked quietly. "Because they need to learn to stop living for show. Everything has to have real worth," she said slowly. "And because I don't want you compromising your principles because of me." Ethan leaned against the rooftop railing, watching snow settle thinly on his sleeve. "I can help without breaking my principles." "For them right now," Lila whispered, "any money poured in will just become polish for their reports. I want, for the first time in years, for them to look in the mirror and admit the truth." Below him, the city lights flickered on. Car headlights stitched the border between day and night, glowing like threads of gold. Ethan stared at those threads, realizing that Lila's way of stitching things together was stronger than he'd ever understood. "Then, what can I do for you?" he asked. A long pause filled with snow. "Break up," Lila said, her voice suddenly calm. Too calm. "Not because I've stopped loving you. Because I don't want to be trapped between you and my family. I need time to find myself again. Not the Dawson daughter, not the billionaire's girlfriend. Just Lila." Ethan closed his eyes. Some words, even when right, still burned on contact. He rested his forehead against the cold steel beam. "If that's what you need, I'll accept it." "Thank you," she whispered, swallowing hard. "Maybe one day, when I'm steadier, if there's still a chance, we'll talk again." The wind shifted. Ethan opened his eyes, watching the snowflakes drift sideways instead of falling straight. "Then I'll just nod," he said quietly, and did, toward the empty space as if she stood there. "I'll wait until you're ready to look at me again." On the other end of the line, Lila wept without sound. Goodbye, Ethan. Just for now, he corrected softly, just loud enough for the wind to hear. Lila's family company had hit free fall. The bank kept calling to cut credit limits, suppliers demanded upfront payments, customers postponed orders, and some even canceled outright. Payroll was due, but cash was almost gone. Everything seemed to be collapsing. Lila tried everything to save the business, but nothing worked. Then one morning, an email appeared about a foundation called the Heartstone Community Initiative, HCI, a fund that helps small companies rebuild responsibly. She reached out immediately, hoping this could be the lifeline they needed. Within a day, her request was approved. Heartstone was known for helping small and medium-sized firms shift to sustainable models, strict financial discipline, local hiring, and zero tolerance for pretty accounting. Nobody knew that Ethan was the founder of Heartstone. He had quietly signed off all authority to the Heartstone team, keeping his name, Reed Capital, completely out of sight. The first meeting took place in a simple room, laminate tables, filtered water, no chandeliers or wine glasses. Heartstone's representatives, a middle-aged couple, got straight to business once they turned on the projector. The company had 2 quarters to prove itself. Cut redundant management layers, keep the core talent. Clean the books, no more temporary adjustments. Shift to eco-friendly, repairable product lines. Protect workers' basic benefits. Prioritize local hiring. Sign environmental agreements with nearby residents. Miss the goals, and the fund walks away. The room went silent. Lila's father, Charles, looked at the screen for a long moment, then said simply, "Do it." Her mother, Margaret, clutched the folder. "Where do we start?" Even Derek, her brother, usually the loud one, just nodded. "Tell us what to do." Lila stood. "Heartstone needs a coordinator. I'll take it. I'll draft the roadmap, set milestones, assign tasks, and report progress on a weekly basis. If we miss targets, I'll take the blame." No one objected. She opened her laptop and began right away. Week 1. Cut meaningless PR contracts, close the fancy showroom, and sell the company cars. Use the money to keep factory meals, insurance, and wages paid on time. Set up a small war room covered in timelines, weekly KPIs, and red, yellow, and green boards. Week 2. Rebuild the books from scratch. Every number must have a person and a receipt behind it. Post real-time data on the workshop wall. Real inventory, real output, real defects. The accounting team must drop the temporary adjustment habit, no excuses. Weeks 3 to 6. Launch a green product pilot line, reforested wood, water-based paint, modular parts that are cheap and replaceable. Install wastewater filters and noise monitors, and set up a public hotline. Lila's own number for community feedback. Work began, and began meant painful. The layoff list was 2 pages long. Redundant relations managers, the event planning team, and the chrome-plated sedans. Lila signed the order to sell the cars and pay wages. Her mother took charge of the workers' kitchen. Same meal portions, same health support. Her father visited each creditor himself this time, no longer sending assistants. Derek joined the carpentry crew, timing each step of the process. "Change the layout, save 12% waiting time," he said. Lila drew the new floor plan on the whiteboard and wrote, "Derek, lead." Every night, Lila sent a company-wide email, exactly 5 bullet points. What we achieved, what we missed, why, how we'll fix it, who deserves thanks. No fluff. One night she even wrote, "Data delay today. My fault for unclear instructions. Fixing tomorrow." People read it and felt lighter. It had been a long time since management talked that honestly. In parallel, Lila attended town meetings. At the local hall, she stood at the wooden podium and said, "Our company used to disturb you. From today, if the noise becomes too loud or the water becomes murky, please call this number. I'll answer and come myself." An elderly man asked, "Will you really, or is that just talk?" Lila replied, "Judge me by the smoke from our chimney and the color of the canal, not by my words." The first 3 months were tight, paychecks small but steady. By 6 months, the luxury furniture division was shut down, replaced by a new workshop for durable household goods and school supplies. The materials were traceable. The paint was water-based, the designs were simple and repairable. The company website changed too. Its new header read, Dawson and Company, crafted with integrity. Beneath it were three promises. 1. No false numbers. 2. No harmful materials. 3. No neglect of workers. When the new Eco Paint line finally ran smoothly, Lila stood by the platform, watching the machines hum evenly. She hung a weekly safety board at the factory door. In the bottom corner, a handwritten note read, Please plant more shade trees near the storage yard. Lila grabbed a red pen and wrote beneath it, Approved. That afternoon, Heartstone's team arrived with a thick set of new certificates, brand registration, green process compliance, and labor safety validation. Each document had a small logo in the corner. Heartstone, supported by ER. Margaret touched the initials. Who's ER? She asked. The Heartstone rep smiled. A benefactor. Fund policy doesn't reveal names. They only care about results. Later that day, everyone gathered in the yard. Charles held the old microphone, speaking slowly. We used to be rich, but not decent. Now we have less, but we're real. Whoever stays on this path with us, I promise. Clean work, slow profit, hard road, but right. He turned to Lila. Thank you for dragging us out of the habit of being beautiful but fake. The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was long and it was warm. That evening, Lila walked through the newly painted workers' housing. She smelled fresh wood, heard clinking pans, and saw children reading on doorsteps. Her chest felt light, not with success, but with the peace of doing the right thing. Back home, she opened the folder of new licenses. Each one had that same logo in the corner. Heartstone, supported by ER. Her finger lingered on the initials. Something flickered in her mind, but she pulled her hand back. She didn't call anyone. The comfort she felt came from knowing the company was standing on its own feet. A week later, a courier arrived with a thick embossed envelope. The wax seal read, City Conservatory Hall. Lila opened it. Dear Dawson and Company, you are cordially invited to the Sustainability Honors Gala. Category, Social Impact Transformation. Date, Friday, 7 p.m. Dress code, black and green. Elegant with a touch of sustainability. She flipped the card. In the bottom right corner was that same small logo. Heartstone, supported by ER. Her heart skipped a beat. The initials echoed in her mind. She silently thanked whoever had rebuilt the foundation beneath her feet. But the most important thing wasn't who helped. It was that the company had chosen honesty and endurance. She folded the invitation neatly, slipped it into her next quarter goals folder, and took a deep breath. Let's go, she whispered to herself, but also to everyone who had walked this road with her. Dawson and Company. That evening, City Conservatory Hall glowed like a winter garden draped in golden light. Soft music floated through the air as companies were honored one by one on stage. At the center stood the sign, Heartstone Community Initiative. Its emblem, a glowing gemstone pierced by light, reminding everyone of resilience in the face of hardship. Lila sat in the second row, wearing a simple black dress with a thin blue trim at the cuffs, the color of sustainability. Dawson and Company had been nominated in the category of social impact transformation. Her parents sat beside her, silent, but their eyes carried a quiet pride. The host read through the list of awards, his tone slowing and deepening with formality. And now please welcome the founder of the Heartstone Foundation, Mr. Ethan Reed. The hall seemed to fall a beat behind the sound. Lila froze. Her breath caught in her chest. Applause filled the room, but she could barely hear it. On stage, under the warm golden lights, Ethan walked out in a black suit, a calm smile in place. He didn't look directly at her, but when the spotlight swept across the rows, she knew. He knew she was there. Standing at the center of the stage, Ethan's voice was deep and measured. Sometimes wealth isn't about accumulation, it's about giving. True wealth is when you can help others stand on their own, rather than relying on you. Heartstone was created for those who dare to begin again, not so they can be saved, but so they can learn to save themselves. Thunderous applause followed. But Lila barely registered it. One thought echoed in her mind. He never left. He hadn't stayed to control her, but to quietly hold her up, to believe she could rise. Every late-night plan she drafted, every spreadsheet she refined, he had been there, silently supporting her from afar. And now her company has won the Social Impact Transformation Award. When the ceremony ended, people stood to shake hands and take photos. Ethan stepped down from the stage and moved through the crowd. Before she could collect herself, he was standing right in front of her. For a few seconds, neither spoke. They simply looked at each other. Ethan smiled faintly, his voice low. "I didn't invest in your company, but I believed in you." Lila bit her lip, tears shimmering in her eyes. "And you were right." She said nothing more. She simply stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, tightly in the middle of the gala's final piano notes. He held her back, not hard, but with enough strength to tell her that all the losses, pride, and love once hidden had finally found their way home. The golden light fell over them like a framed picture. There were no CEOs, no billionaires, and no negotiations. Only two people who had once lost, once learned, and finally rediscovered the true value in each other. One late winter evening, the Dawson house glowed again. But this time, there were no black-suited servers, no crystal glasses, no gold-embossed menus. Only the smell of baked bread filled the kitchen, soft candlelight, and warm laughter. Charles, Lila's father, straightened the tablecloth, looked at his wife and daughter, and smiled. "It's time to invite Ethan to dinner again," he said, this time with real gratitude. The door opened. Ethan stepped in, not in a gala tuxedo, but in a simple dark sweater, his smile unpretentious. No one looked at him with judgment anymore. They welcomed him in, poured water, and sat down together, not as investors or strangers, but as people. On the table sat roast meat, bread, an ordinary bottle of wine, and a pot of soup that Lila had cooked herself. But the atmosphere was entirely different. No tension, no pretense, no pride. Halfway through the meal, Charles spoke, his voice steady but sincere. "We once looked down on you. Back then we measured people by watches, suits, and cars. Thank you for not seeking revenge, but instead letting us see ourselves for who we were." Ethan smiled lightly, shaking his head. "I didn't teach you anything. Truth did. When people have nothing left to show off, they finally see what's real." Margaret, who had once been the coldest toward him, looked at him now with eyes full of remorse and warmth. "If it weren't for Heartstone, we would have lost everything. But I know it wasn't the fun that saved us. It was you." He smiled gently. "It wasn't me. It was Lila. She's the one who changed everything." Lila blushed and shook her head. "I just did what was right." Then she reached for his hand, her voice soft but steady. "I used to be hurt that you hid who you were, and that you left when things got hardest. But now I understand. Sometimes silence is another way of protecting love." Ethan looked at her, eyes calm and full of everything they'd been through. "And sometimes," he said quietly, "you have to be misunderstood to know who truly understands you." For a while the room fell still. Outside, snow began to fall, soft flakes brushing against the window pane. Charles stood to refill the glasses, his tone lighter now. "A toast," he said, raising his glass, "to the mistakes worth remembering. Because without them, none of us would have learned what decency means." They laughed. The clink of glasses was gentle but resonant, like the sound of a chapter closing. Lila leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder and whispered, "I think real wealth is this, sitting here with the people I once lost." Ethan nodded, his voice low and warm. "And not to prove anything, just to be thankful we never gave up." The candlelight flickered, dancing in their eyes. The dinner ended with a simple apple pie and shared laughter. There were no grand promises, no speeches, just peace, the kind that takes a long road to find. On the table beside the candle lay an old Christmas card. In one corner, a small line of text read, "For family only." Ethan looked at it, smiling softly. "So, I'm family now, right?" Lila squeezed his hand and nodded. "This time," she said, "no invitation needed.